I'm just going to give my introduction, and then when I'm done, Okay. Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Anna Stur. I'm the director of the Center for South Asian Studies, and it's my great pleasure today to welcome Dr. Yaqoob Khan Bangash, who is currently a Fulbright Fellow at Harvard University through the USEF Pakistan. Dr. Bangash is a historian of modern South Asia, and he's currently at the Mittal Institute. That's the word I was trying to remember. And his current research interests lie in the emergence of Pakistan as a post-colonial state, with broader interests in decolonization, modern state formation, formation of identities, and the emergence of ethnic and identity-based conflicts. Dr. Bangash's first book, A Princely Affair, Accession and Integration by Princely States in Pakistan, 1947 to 1955, was published by Oxford University Press in 2015. In 2018, he completed another book, Between the Sword and the Pen, The History of the Lahore High Court. He's currently working on a monograph on the imagination of Pakistan as a country after its creation, using the debates of the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan from 1947 to 56 as primary material. In 2016, Dr. Bangash founded the first academic literary festival in Pakistan, the Afkar-e-Taza Think Fest, which attracted over 16,000 people in 2018, and as far as I know, is still going strong. So we're very, very happy to welcome Dr. Bangash, and we'll just present him with his way. And I'm going to turn this laptop over so you don't have to look at it, but it's going to pick up your sound better if I do it like this.
Of course. Well, thank you so much, and so lovely to be here, especially coming in from Boston where there's 28 degrees to about an increase of 60 degrees in a day. But wonderful to be here. And of course, I ran into Anna at the Madison conference. So we chatted, and I think within 24 hours, all of this was set up. So that was really, really fast and really helpful. So today, what I'm going to talk to you about in the next sort of about half an hour or so, 40 minutes, perhaps, is something that I'd never worked on because I thought enough people had worked on. So therefore, it's one of those things like if you work on India or Pakistan, if you hear the word partition, everyone's worked on the partition. There are like hundreds and thousands of, probably thousands of books on it now, and you think everything is being done. So I also thought everything is being done. My PhD work began after 1947, after the creation of Pakistan itself, looking at the princely states. So I kind of looked at a bit of partition, but not too much. And then I had lots of friends, who had worked very much on the partition. So I thought it's done and dusted. Till in 2016, I became the director of the digitization project of the Punjab archives in Lahore, which is the largest archive in Pakistan. And as I was going through it for the next 2 years, I realized I actually found just random documents on the partition. And one of the most interesting documents was this committee report, which was called the Punjab Partition Committee. Now, everyone's heard of the Radcliffe Commission because that created the boundary between India and Pakistan and, well, now Bangladesh and India also. But that was just one small bit. Radcliffe only created the boundary and that's it. After that, the real partition, the real separation of both Bengal and the Punjab was done by these partition committees that were provincially set up. In the Punjab, it was called the Punjab Partition Committee. In Bengal, it was called the Bengal Separation Committee. And I really like that one place it's called separation and the other place partition. And of course, there are a lot of reasons behind that. So I found the minutes of that committee that really had not been used. And it was very interesting that, a lot of them pointed out to very interesting narratives that had not been realized. One of the main things that it kind of challenged, and that's what I wrote by the end of it, is that there was not all mayhem and disorder in the lead up to partition. And, there was a lot of cooperation between the two sides. There was a lot of order, actually, in terms of a number of things, especially when it came to governance issues. So the law and order thing, which of course did fall apart to a certain extent, but very interestingly, I would argue after the 15th of August, before the 15th of August, and I've gone through the newspaper records and the government records, maybe about 10% of the killing takes place pre the 15th of August, 90% takes place post the 15th of August, which is not just sort of spontaneous, but it has a lot of other elements of it being organized and actually planned by locals, but by the governments also on both sides. So these new things began to come up. And while I was looking at that, I also came up, looked at records of the civil servants, because of course civil servants ran India, the Indian civil service, the elite core of people, and looked at how they picked either India or Pakistan. And especially in a place like the Punjab, it was very interesting because Punjab was very mixed. It had Hindu, Muslims, Christians, Parsis, Jews, everyone there. And how did they make their choice? And Punjab being one of the bigger cadres of the Indian civil service, those questions became very interesting. And while I was looking through that and ended up actually like writing an article on it, that's when I came about sort of working on Indian Christians a bit. Because and as the title of the talk itself says, they're the unrelated community. The partition or the separation was between Muslims on one hand and Hindus and Sikhs on the other side. But you had about, at that time, 500,000 Indian Christians in the Punjab, and no one really knew what they were up to and what they were actually doing. And the reason I really wanted to focus on the Indian Christians and find out their perspective was also from the fact that unlike other places in India, let's say the UP or even bits of central India, even around Delhi, Christians are a very, very small percentage, and they remain a very small percentage, 1 to 2%. In the Punjab, there are lots of areas where they form about even 7 to 10% at that time, and which is kind of consistent even now to a large extent. And in the most controversial districts, which had a mixed population, like, the Lahore division, that was Lahore, Amritsar, Gujranwala, and Sialkot area, which is literally like the center of the Punjab. So if you know the map of India and Pakistan, it's really sort of 100 miles either side on the Radcliffe line. Christians formed a substantial 5 to 7% population in each of the districts. And in Lahore, the capital of the Punjab, together with the Muslims and Sikhs and the Hindus, they had a substantial presence. And the Catholic and the Anglican cathedrals are the big imposing ones in the city center. So they weren't kind of absent. They were very much present, and their numbers did kind of make a difference. So therefore, I thought, well, no one's really looked into properly what had happened to this community during the time of partition, and how did they deal with questions of partition. And during that, I began, of course, from the civil servants, and I'll just quickly explain to you about the civil servants and then come to another very interesting person whose career then I kind of followed, and I'll make some points about that. So with the civil servants, a very interesting civil servant that I came across, the first one was this guy called Edward Nirmal Mangatrai. Now, if you just look at the name Mangatrai, which means, of course, they converted at some point from Hinduism, and this was a very important Indian Christian family in Lahore. And Edward Nirmal came up to his uncle, who was Justice Sir Dalip Singh. Very interesting connection here. So Justice Sir Dalip Singh was was the grandson of the Maharaja of Kapurthala. And the brother of, if you worked on India, you'd recognize the name Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, who was the first health minister of India. So it was very interesting to see how they're all connected. And of course, he's the uncle of Mangatrai. And when Mangatrai, as the ICS officers, comes up to Sir Dalip Singh, who is the judge of the High Court of Law, and says, "Uncle, what should I do? Pick one side or the other." And this is what he says. He says, "Slow death in India against quick death in Pakistan. That is the scope of your decision." And I think in July 1947, that's a very accurate description, very prescient, whereas things changed in Pakistan fairly quickly. Things did not change in India for a while, but then changed eventually. And, now 75 years down the line, I think what Dalip Singh was saying was very right. And that, of course, intrigued me more because, there are two bad options. Which bad option would you pick and why? So Edward Mangatrai ended up being a very interesting character, and I actually trace all of his history. He ended up choosing India. Not because he loved that side more, but because at that time he was posted in Delhi. So he thought, well, why move? His sister, who was in Lahore at that time, chose not to move and ended up becoming the principal of a women's university in Lahore called Kanate College, the oldest one in North India and still remains, and was its principal from, I think, about 56 to 70. So for a considerable number of years. So it was very interesting in how the Mangatrais went their both ways, and how a lot of the times people talk about split families in terms of Muslims or in terms of some Hindus, but no one really has ever mentioned that there were split families in in terms of Christians. And they still remain. And I'll perhaps, offline mention one very interesting family, which, if I mention now in the recording might get slightly controversial. But, it's interesting how they've just been left out, and there were so many families. And Edward Mangathrai actually ends up being a lot more interesting. So in 1965, as Pakistan and India are in war and Pakistan's invaded the Indian part of Kashmir, he's the chief secretary of Kashmir. That's another interesting thing. A couple of years later, he falls in love with the niece of Jawaharlal Nehru, Nayantara Sehgal, and marries her. And then when Nehru's dead, and well, by that time Nehru is dead, but Indira Gandhi doesn't like that she got married to this guy, and then he's kind of forcibly like retired when he's Secretary Petroleum or something. So it's very interesting that by the end of it, like the Mangathrais kind of marry into the Vijay Lakshmi Pandit's daughter. At that time. So that was one very interesting person that I kind of traced. The second very interesting person which I traced was also an Indian Christian who had converted in from Hindus in the family, was Mr. H.D. Bhanon. And he was very interesting. He had served in 1945 as the chief secretary of the Punjab, so a very, very important position. And when he was asked to choose, and here it was again very interesting, he said, well, actually, I only care where my home village is. So if my home village goes to Pakistan, I'll go to Pakistan. And if my home village goes to India, I'll go to India. So his home village was Ajnala Tehsil, which is in Amritsar. And then again, it was very interesting. And here, again, the Radcliffe thing kind of comes back. Ajnala is literally on the border of India and Pakistan. Now it's actually ended up in India. But if the Radcliffe Commission, and we'll come to it in just a minute, if the Radcliffe Commission had noted Christians with the Muslims in Ajnala, they would have had a very, very clear majority. So at the moment, without including Christians, Muslims are just over 50%, so not like 50.4 or something. But if you include Christians, they become 55%, like that side. So there were some places where Christians could really tip the balance if that were ever counted. But Mr. Bhanon was very interesting. He said, well, wherever my village is, and he remained in Lahore till the 17th, when it was decided that it's gone to India, and it ended up then going to India. So again, a very kind of odd kind of a position. The third person that I'll speak on, and then I'll move to the other person that I am working on, and we'll substantially talk about him. Was Mr. S.M. Burke. S.M. Burke was in the Indian civil service, and he thought that both choices aren't great, and therefore he decided to take early retirement. And since his family lived in what is now Pakistan, he just took early retirement and moved there. So again, a very interesting perspective where he had decades to work in the Indian civil service, yet he thought that none of the countries would kind of be, open to Indian Christians coming in. But he, by the end of it, had a very interesting career, because a year after he retired, Jinnah, the Governor General of Pakistan, asked him to come back and join the Pakistan Foreign Service. And he ended up being ambassador to about a dozen countries and had an amazing career and became an academic in retirement. And I think was a professor at University of Minnesota and wrote excellent books on India and Pakistan. So again, it's very interesting that initially he actually thought that this is not going to work out, and then took retirement, and then eventually he joins the Pakistan Foreign Service and is there till the 70s. So all these kinds of things, of course, at one level they are all elite people. But the reason that I do want to talk about them is that with the common man, which is kind of not in the know, like, the common person doesn't know really what's happening. What was really interesting is that these elite people actually have no clue what's happening either. So in some ways, the partition kind of, in a very bizarre sense, actually equalizes these differences, because in that partition moment, I think these differences really disappear. You are as scared of what is going to happen to you. You're as scared about being looted, killed, not knowing where your future will be as a common person. So I think this is a very kind of an odd equalizing position where the uncertainty of partition kind of brings everyone together. Now, the last person that I want to talk about, and I'll dwell the next 20 minutes on him, is this very interesting guy called S.P. Singha. Satya Prakash Singha is the full name. And he was at that time in 1947 the Speaker of the Punjab Assembly, and an Indian Christian. And he died very soon in February 1948. And what is really fascinating about S.P. Singha, and he was given a title of initially Rai Bahadur, and then I think, just a couple of years before he died, he was made a Dewan Bahadur, which is also very interesting because both Rai Bahadur and Dewan Bahadur are titled are titles given to Hindus. And there's literally no explanation, and I've looked at the record why a Christian was given a Hindu title. It does not make any sense, but it was very interesting that, so the Muslims would get like Khan Bahadur and, those kinds of things. But that again sort of shows that Indian Christians did not neatly fit into any category. So even when the British had to honor an Indian Christian, they really didn't know what to do. So they kind of probably, my hunch is they just looked at from where did they can convert. So if they converted from Hinduism, they'll get the Hindu title. And if they converted from Islam, they'd get the Khan Bahadur title, which I again think is, at some point very ironic because that's the religion they converted from. And now as a mark of distinction, you're giving them a title that is recognized in that religion and that community, which is, absurd. But, that gives you another way of how, British imperialism worked in South Asia, where, after you've picked a side, no matter perhaps, how different you are, things might not change. So this S.P. Singha guy is really, really fascinating because after his death, he has been made into somewhat of a great hero of Pakistan. And I grew up reading about him. If you Google the name S.P. Singha, you will find lots of Pakistani newspapers and books like talking about him and saying amazing things about him. And for a large time, I just took it on face value because it must be true, But then as, I'm still reminded of it. I was an undergraduate, and one of my tutors once said, she gave us some book published in the 1970s and asked me to go and check the footnotes. And I said, well, what a useless task is this? But once I checked the footnotes, I realized 30% didn't exist. So like that wonderful thing that happened 20 years ago to me, once one thing was kind of questionable about the narrative of S.P. Singha, I began to look at his whole career and said, this is interesting. What's happened? So what had happened were two very interesting things. One is that most books written on Indian Christians and Punjabi Christians say that he cast, as the Speaker of the Assembly, he had a casting vote. So there was a tie, apparently, between the Hindus and Sikhs on one side and Muslims on the other. And S.P. Singha cast the tiebreaker in favor of Pakistan. So that's a narrative that's everywhere. I can give you a quote where this is very important. So the one Punjabi Christian who is really, really important, Emmanuel Zafar, writes in 2007 saying, at that time, only the votes of Christian members had the casting votes, which is a bit odd. But anyways, on voting date, 88 votes were cast in favor of India and 19 won for Pakistan, including the 3 Christian votes. Then another professor, actually, Salamat Akhtar, writes in 97, and this is interesting. It's 2007 and 97. So 97 when it was like 50 years of independence, and a lot of people were writing that. So in 1997, Professor Salamat Akhtar says, the most important and memorable feat of Pakistani Christians is the casting vote of Dewan Bahadur S.P. Singha, which he used at that time for the partition of the Punjab on June 23rd, 1947, while voting for the creation of the new Punjab Constituent Assembly as opposed to the Indian one, and for the inclusion of the whole of the Punjab in Pakistan. From the creation of Pakistan, every notable Christian leader has been talking about this casting vote. So this is considered like a really big thing, which, as you must imagine now, it's actually completely untrue. The casting vote never happened, and the difference, and we'll come to it in a bit, the differences of votes were such that the Indian Christian votes didn't really matter. But I began to imagine, well, why did this begin? And I'll come to it in a minute, because this has very much to do with how sort of now Pakistani Christians kind of imagine their identity and how much that is tied to this narrative. The second thing that I really looked at about this guy is that every book, again, says that this guy was a long supporter of the Muslim League and was very much, a Muslim. And, he even actually said at one point, which is actually true, that, Christians are just very nearly Muslims. And it's like, well, if they're very nearly Muslims, why are they Christians? But he did say that once. So because of that comment, which he did say, everyone says, well, that means from day one he must have supported the Muslim League and the creation of Pakistan, because that just is completely true. So again, I'll just give you two quick quotes. Ibn al-Zafar, in that History of Christians in Pakistan, says, during the independence movement, the leaders of the All India Muslim League promised to give comparatively more privileges to the minorities, especially to the Christians. Thus, the All India Christian Association preferred to make an agreement with the All India Muslim League, according to which agreement the All India Christian Association struggled side by side with the Muslim League. Now, this is very interesting because, and there are narratives that there were Christians there when the Pakistan resolution was approved in 1940, and they were all support of it. Conveniently forgetting the small bit that the party that they were really trying to support is called the All India Muslim League, where no non-Muslim can even become a member. So it's kind of complicated to work with them because they don't allow you membership in the party, and it would have been very awkward to have a Christian wing of the Muslim League because the fact it's called the Muslim League. Except I should say, as a footnote, very recently I heard RSS has a Muslim wing. So I'm not quite sure. So maybe it can happen, but that'll be a PhD thesis to look into which kinds of people actually go in there. So the other quote that I want to give is actually of a descendant of S.P. Singha, Sarah Singha, who works at Georgetown. And she also quotes this narrative and says, and I quote, that a coalition between the Christians and the Muslim League in the mid-1940s was created. And then they worked together, on socio-political equality, and that Christian leaders officially supported the Pakistan resolution. So this is, an academic article like from 2016. And this narrative has been kind of, used by lots of people who have, from outside written about it. So Theodore Gabriel and a couple of other people who have written good books on Christians in Pakistan keep talking about it. Now, the question is, and it's rife in newspaper writings. In any newspaper you see, and around the 15th of August, everyone talks about it because this is this great thing. And about 10 years ago, the Pakistan government even launched a postage stamp in memory of S.P. Singha, calling him one of the great workers of the Pakistan movement. So this is a narrative that is completely set in terms of Pakistan. Which, of course, now that I'm writing this paper and once it gets published, I should probably be persona non grata at lots of places because no one really wanted to look at how things happened. But anyways, and there have been very small correctives, but it's quite fascinating that no one's really looked into the correctives. So I once wrote an academic article, a newspaper article, talking about those votes thing. No one really cared. Professor Ishtaq Ahmed also wrote an academic article talking about it. And it's just that as if those two sort of newspaper articles are just ignored. And this leads me to the, and I said I'll come back to the first point, is that what has happened about S.P. Singha, and that I really find fascinating, is that S.P. Singha has become this kind of torchbearer of the existence of Punjabi Christians in Pakistan now. And his role, therefore, has to be very, carefully crafted for an identity of Pakistani Christians to be made real. And they've looked back into kind of connecting him to the Pakistan movement, because for them that is a sign of legitimacy, because if he was not in the Pakistan movement, then Christians being in Pakistan somehow seems illegitimate. And this I would want to connect to from where I began in saying that there were the unrelated community, things were happening and they didn't know what to do. So this is kind of one way of trying to look at it and saying, well, actually, not that we weren't concerned, not that we were just hedging our bets and looking at things as they developed. We actually did take a side, and this narrative actually at the moment is very central to any argument that comes in Pakistan about giving equal rights to minorities and especially Christians. They talk about S.P. Singha like S.P. Singha is kind of like if Jinnah is for Muslims, S.P. Singha is for Christians. So his sort of identity has become very central to what has happened. The current Christian social argument, current Christian political argument in Pakistan. So I think, one side, of course, would be very interesting to look at. And that's one thing which I haven't completely done in trying to find out where did this narrative begin. Because, as I was saying that, some footnotes just don't exist, but someone must have made it up at some point. I have traced it back to the 1970s, and I'm still trying to work back and see that is it anything beyond the before the 1970s or not. My developing argument on that is that it is mostly a 1970s phenomena, mainly because of the fact that up to the 1970s, the main people in kind of the firing range were Pakistani Hindus. Because they were about 15-20% of the population. But after 1971, when Bangladesh is created, you get, 90% of the Hindus are there. So the Pakistani, what are left in Pakistan are about 5-6% Hindus. So then the Hindus are no longer the primary target of sort of attack, so to speak. And then the Christians get really scared because till that time, they're shielded behind the fact that first, the state kind of attacks Hindus. And once Bangladesh becomes independent, that is when the Christians begin to get really scared. And then very soon, on the 1st of January 1972, Christian schools and a lot of Christian schools and hospitals get taken over by the government. So that kind of gives a huge shock to the Christian community in Pakistan. And my sort of developing argument on that point is that is when they begin to develop this narrative. And the usefulness there was that S.P. Singha dies within 6 months of Pakistan being created. So there's no one to actually say that's made up. And therefore, it's very easy to make things up about him. And then, of course, one person begins to do it, and then another picks up, and then the third picks up. And by now, I've actually, I did tabulate that there are about 28 references to this vote. And everyone keeps citing other books for it. Whereas one place, which is amazing, and I won't say who did that because they'll kind of shame the author. One person, I think, was so sure that this voting narrative is correct that they even cited a newspaper record, which is completely untrue because a newspaper did not, come up with the fake count there. But that person must have been so sure that they just cited the newspaper and saying that must be accurate. And it's accurate. The newspaper did. On the 23rd of June, 1947, the newspaper Dawn that this person has quoted did give the figures. It's just that they're wildly different from what this person has quoted. And this I really relate to the fact that, it's such an accepted narrative that everyone just kind of uses it. But I think this has to do a lot with, questions of identity and questions of sort of, how the Christians in Pakistan see themselves now. But, that's really other thing. But I think once I finish this, that's the only kind of that's the unfinished bit of this article and tracing it back and kind of seeing it. Of course, if I find something in the 50s about it, then my whole argument kind of dies. But at the moment, I haven't really found anything beyond 1973-74 when this argument comes up. Now, just a quick kind of a view over how S.P. Singha's narrative actually unfolds, because then I got so interested in. I said, wow, this is a really fascinating guy. He dies in February 1948. Then, very interestingly, his wife is made a member of parliament. But then, was he really that important? Was he really like an amazing man who actually did all these great things and, was aligned with the Muslim League from day one? So the narrative about the voting is very easy. You just look up the numbers, fine. But, what about the man himself? What are his thinkings? And his thinkings are very interesting because they are very much connected to the development of Indian Christian politics during the interwar era. And I won't go into the details. I've got like a long chapter on it. But basically, I'll make a couple of points on this. First is that Indian Christian politics in the Punjab develops very differently from Indian Christian politics elsewhere in India. Why? Mainly because most of Indian Christians are in the south. So, what is now Kerala and Tamil Nadu, that's where most Indian Christians are. That's where they're the most educated. That's where they're the most influential. There's some Indian Christians who are influential in Bengal, but as you go north, they get thinned out to a large extent. So they're not really influential in the north of India. Secondly, Indian Christian politics mirrors religious politics amongst the Christians very early on. And there is a huge move towards indigenization of Christian missions. So Christian missions are mainly led by British, American, Belgian, Dutch, Spanish, these kinds of missionaries, both from the Catholic and the Protestant side. And there is a great move in the south of India for indigenization, and in the interwar era, that indigenization kind of begins to happen. There are local bishops who are elected, and a lot of movement begins there. That thing does not happen in North India because Christianity was only reintroduced in North India in about 1834, when American Presbyterian missionaries turned up in what is now Indian Punjab. They came to Ludhiana. So they're not that old. There are not that many Indian educated Christians in North India. The population is mainly village-based. There are a lot of caste issues. There is a lot of education issues because the large majority of Indian Christians in North India are from the lower castes. A lot of them are from the untouchable community. So there are lots of caste issues. There are lots of issues of education, about sanitation, so many things that for them to indulge in this kind of, upper class politics, so to speak, is just not possible. So they kind of are very quiet at that time. But there is a group of sort of urban educated Indian Christians that do kind of clamor for things, mainly because they were there were enough Christian numbers to necessitate 2 seats in the Punjab Assembly. So, 2 seats in the Punjab Assembly, in terms of the fact that there were daily 200 seats, don't make that much of a difference. But to think that usually the numbers of different communities are very close, 2 seats could sway things one way or the other. So they could actually kind of make or break the government, so to speak. So not insignificant, but not sort of terribly significant for the most part, but can become had the potential to become significant. The third thing that I want to talk about here is that Punjabi Christian politics, and this is following the work of John Webster, who has extensively written about Christian conversion and social formation in northern India. He argues, and I to an extent agree, that it was far more now becoming pro-Indian than anti-British. And this is again distinguishes them from South India, where the ideas of let's get independence and all of that are very much coming into Indian Christians. But here they say, well, let's be pro-Indian, let's do Indian things and not talk about the British. So they don't really become anti-British at all. In fact, they become extremely pro-British at some bits, and there is an he's not an Indian Christian, but an Anglo-Indian, but they work very closely together at that time. That even when the Defense of India rules are actually passed that create kind of a martial law kind of a situation in India, this Anglo-Indian member of the Punjab Assembly says, well, it should go even further. So, at times they're more British than the British, and the whole, loyalty tests and everything, those kinds of things are being argued, which makes it a lot more interested in how they are kind of framing their politics in India. So when the first elections happen, with franchise in Punjab after the Government of India 1935 Act, and the elections happen in 37, there are 2 Christian seats. One is won by Chaudhry Jalaluddin Ambar, who had been a tehsildar, which is kind of a local revenue official in North India. In a lot of India, that's what it is called. And then the East Central Indian Christian seat was won by Mr. S.P. Singha. Now, how did S.P. Singha come to this to politics? So he had been in politics for 10 years before partition. He wins the seat in 1937 for the first time. He comes there because he is the controller examinations in the Punjab University. And the Punjab University itself is a very fascinating thing because, it's the first Indian university that taught both in English and the vernacular. And actually, initially was supposed to be called Oriental University, to focus more on Indian studies rather than Western. But by the end of it, it actually taught both. And you had lots of Indian Christians that were involved there. So he was the controller examinations there. And he was of a mixed ancestry. So his one of his parents came in from Bengal, the other from the UP, but they eventually sort of settled in the Punjab. So he was a very urban Christian, I should say, and not ethnically Punjabi, which I'll come back to it eventually, which makes it very interesting. So the first guy that I mentioned, Chaudhry Jalaluddin Ambar, dies in 1943, and he is replaced by Mr. K.L. Ralia Ram, who is a Punjabi Christian, and he's the headmaster of the Mission High School in Lahore. Now, he's very interesting because the Mission High School in Lahore was the first English medium school in Lahore, built in December 1849. So just 6-8 months after the British had even entered Lahore, this mission school was set up. He's also the chairman of the board of Forman Christian College, the largest Christian institution in northern India. So a very important person. So you've got KL Ralialam and you've got S.P. Singha sort of on these two poles. Now, in the interest of time, I'll kind of quickly move through. But S.P. Singha is very interesting because initially he joins what is called the Unionist Party in the Punjab. And the Unionist Party is a combination of Hindu, Muslims, and Sikhs. And it is, for the just to trying to explain it to it in a sentence or two, it is a party of middle-level landowners. So the common landed interests of Hindu, Muslims, and Sikhs kind of creates this party together. It's actually very understudied because it won 2 elections. It actually did really well. And was an example in a province where people said that Hindu, Muslims, and Sikhs don't get along. It was an example that they did, and it worked well. And it was in government and really did a lot of good work. So he joins that political party and supports them and kind of keeps with them. Then comes the 1946 election. So he is a member of a political party, which is interesting. In all the narratives about him, this is never mentioned, that he's a member of a political party. It's considered that he was always a part of the Muslim League. So he is a member of the Unionist Party that is against the Muslim League and says that Muslims should not have anything separated out. They should, all communities should work together. Then the 1946 election comes. And the question is, everyone turns to the Punjab Assembly, and the question comes, who should become the Speaker of the Assembly? That's the first election. The governor at this time appoints S.P. Singha as, again, the unrelated community person, as the interim Speaker. Now, again, and I keep coming back to the theme of the unrelated thing. That's very interesting that the governor said, well, he's not a Hindu, not a Sikh, not a Muslim. So that's the right person to be the Speaker, to hold the election for the Speaker. And by the end of it, there is such a quarrel between all sides that even if he's the interim Speaker, and ethically it would be very awkward for him to be the Speaker and stand for election, he ends up becoming the Speaker because the Muslim League puts up a Muslim candidate and everyone says, oh, we need to ensure that there is no Muslim candidate from the Muslim League. So he ends up becoming the Speaker of the Punjab Assembly, not because of himself, but because the community was considered the unrelated community, and that the Hindus and Sikhs wanted to prevent a Muslim from being elected. Now, what's really fascinating, and I'll just perhaps quote just a couple of things, that it was a very close vote. So Singha got 91 votes against the candidate of the Muslim League, Malik Barkat Ali, who got 79 votes. And his standing as Speaker, very interestingly, was almost immediately compromised by the Premier or the Chief Minister, the Prime Minister of the Punjab, when the Prime Minister of the Punjab, Sir Khizat Khayar Tiwana, says, and he is sort of giving a speech after Singha has been elected. But this is what the Prime Minister says. I wanted that in the atmosphere prevailing in the House, a neutral belonging to the smallest minority should hold the chair as an impartial man till an agreed solution was possible. Till then, I request you, sir, addressing Singha, that as a neutral, you should undertake this task, because I feel that by that time, the fever that has got into the heads of my honorable friends opposite, the Muslim League, will come down. And he says, ordinarily, this post is held by the majority community, and it was in the fitness of things that a Muslim should have occupied the chair. But since it has not been possible to come up with an agreed Muslim, you have been chosen in the meantime. So this is like 5 minutes after the poor guy has been voted in, that the Prime Minister himself is saying, yeah, you're just there for a short time to be figured things out, basically. And this again is very interesting because he's kind of part of this political party, and the premier of this political party is kind of undermining him. So everyone can guess what happens then. He resigns from the party. But what he resigns, very interestingly, I should finish the quote, because it's, the end of it is also fascinating. And he says, Sir Khizar Tiwana says, if communal harmony and mutual adjustment and an agreed solution become possible, I know you will be the first person to vacate this office and allow the majority community to occupy it. So the poor guy has been kind of, not left with with kind of a greatness of office. Anyways, well, he resigns from the political party and says, and this is very, very, very interesting, that I'm resigning from the Unionist Party because it is becoming a Muslim party and is looking after Muslim interests rather than everyone's interest. I'm assuming that, the comments of the Prime Minister were not taken in the right vein. But I point this out because the fact that, the claim that since the 1940s, he'd been supporting the Muslim League and everything, like here, he's clearly saying that he's going to leave the Unionist Party because it's becoming a Muslim party rather than the mixed party it was. So it's got nothing to do with the fact that, he was always like supporting the Muslim League. He actually stood for election against the Muslim League candidate. So his whole thing of this greatness of the chair, again, it's the unrelated community bit that sort of, ends him earning that kind of chair of the Punjab Assembly. And he tries to kind of emphasize that and says that, it will be a while before this happens and all of that. Now, as he is the chair of the Punjab Assembly, in March 1947, the Khizr Hayat Tiwana government, because there are lots of protests by the Muslim League and kind of, attacks and everything, resigns. And the question is, who is going to make the new government? And the Muslim League says, well, join us and we'll make the government. So S.P. Singha has his vote, obviously, like if there is a tie, but then there is the other Indian Christian, and then there's the Anglo-Indian, and there's one British person. So they've got 4 Christians there in the Punjab Assembly. And as late as April 1947, Singha is saying to the newspaper people that our votes are not available to the Muslim League to make a government. We will not support the Muslim League to make the government. And actually, in fact, if they'd supported the Muslim League would have been, I think, 3 people short of a majority, which they'd hope that they'll cobble together from, some others, like from some Sikh parties and all that. So at that time, they were very significant. But Singha, as late as April 1947, and I can even give you the date, it's April 12, 1947, and he says that our votes are, quote, definitely not available to the Muslim League to form a government, which of course, antagonizes the Muslim League at that time, right? So they are very unhappy about what is going to happen. And then all of a sudden in May 1947, everything changes and Singha becomes kind of, the standard bearer of the Muslim League. Now, the question is, what happens? All of a sudden, Singha is, saying that we are, Christians are almost Muslims, This he actually does say in late June 1947. What happens really is, and this, brings it kind of full circle, is Mr. Radcliffe. When Radcliffe turns up in India, the task given to him is to separate Muslims from non-Muslims, right? And to draw a line accordingly. Now, anyone looking at the Punjab at that time, if you had just done a notional boundary distribution, would have shown that out of the 500,000 Indian Christians in the Punjab, 450,000 would have ended up in Pakistan. Only 50,000 would have gone on the Indian side. So as that was announced that there will be a boundary commission, on the 3rd of June, that is going to demarcate into Muslim and non-Muslim areas, that's when Singha flips and says, wow, 450,000 Indian Christians are going to be in Pakistani Punjab. How can we be supporting, a joint kind of a thing? Now it's all about which side you are on. And I think this is very interesting that actually, I would have liked the fact that if Singha's pragmatism would have been more highlighted, that's when he makes that pragmatic move to go towards India. Now, it's not that easy and very complicated. And this goes back to, when I was talking about Singha's background. So Singha is from a mixed family, but they're not really Punjabis. He's at that time, by this time, he is the registrar of the Punjab University. So a very important social and government position. But the other person who is there with the Pakistani seat and is very, very important is Mr. Ravi Alam, who is from the Punjab, is the headmaster of the mission school and the chairman of the board of governors at Former Christian College. His wife, interestingly enough, writes to Jinnah and says that the real traitor is S.P. Singha and that he should have supported the Muslims from way earlier. And it's because of him that the Muslim League government isn't taking place. So the subtext to the flipping of S.P. Singha is the fact that there's a movement now of local Christians against him saying, did you not see that the Muslim League is going to come to power in West Punjab? Why are you not with them? right? So there is a whole element of how internal Christian politics is beginning to emerge. Now, the question is, why does that emerge in favor of the Muslim League and not anyone else? One is very pragmatic. The other thing is that from the 1900 onwards, and this is a very interesting kind of a split in how Christian conversion happens. Up till about, say, 1880s, 1890s, Christian conversion in the Punjab is of upper class people. A lot of Muslims can convert, a lot of Maulvis actually convert. So there are lots of, there are about 100 Maulvis in Delhi that still kept the name Maulvi and became Christians. And in the same way, on the Hindu side, a lot of upper class people. And, it is at this time that one of the sons of the Maharaja of Kapurthala converts. So you've got a huge kind of a significant conversion. But after the 1890s, the majority conversion is of lower caste and untouchables. And that leads to a very kind of an anti-Hindu streak amongst Punjabi Christians, that is something that they want to leave behind. So they end up being more anti-Hindu and ended up being more pro-Muslim because of this fact. So this Christian, and sadly, I've realized I've run out of time, but, I'll just kind of quickly make a couple of points. This thing is also very understudied, how Christian identity in the Punjab is actually created as a reaction to, rather than a self-identification with something. So a lot of this is against Hindus, that we don't like Hindus and therefore we must like Muslims, rather than we don't like Hindus and therefore we have developed our own culture and tradition. But that's really doesn't become the main issue. It becomes, we pick on one community and go against another community. So in terms of identity formation, I think, and I'll leave it there because I think it's a very interesting question, which in about 3 minutes that I'm hoping to end, I can't answer. But just to flag it and how complicated Indian Christian kind of identity politics kind of develops here, and fascinatingly develops in very different ways in what happens in Indian Punjab afterwards, and it kind of goes into a very interesting different direction. But I think it kind of moves towards from this. Now, so S.P. Singha, and again, I'll skip the details. He goes and speaks to Jinnah and says, well, can you please help us? We will give you our votes and we will kind of support you wholeheartedly. And Jinnah says, a great thing that you will. But that's about it. We can't really help you anywhere beyond that. And Singha says, but I'm the speaker of the Punjab Assembly. Can't you give me a seat in the Pakistan Constituent Assembly? And he said, sorry, yeah, that's not going to happen. And in fact, because S.P. Singha had aligned with himself at the Muslim League at the 11th hour, the people who were going to support him for the Pakistan Constituent Assembly seat flipped and supported a congressperson to the Pakistan Constituent Assembly, who actually did attend the Pakistan Constituent Assembly for a couple of weeks and then left for India, which again, and his family actually had a very interesting connection to India. So this was a guy called Bhim Sen Sachar, who ended up being the chief minister of East Punjab. And his son was Justice Sachar, who actually wrote that committee report on Indian Muslims. And his daughter married Kuldeep Nayyar, the great Indian journalist. So again, Sachar Saab ended up being a member of the Pakistan Constituent Assembly rather than S.P. Singha. So eventually S.P. Singha kind of gets screwed from both sides, by the Hindu and Sikh sides that now turn against him because he's gone towards the Muslim side, but the Muslim side also because, doesn't really matter. The votes don't add up. And since I've mentioned the votes so many times, let me just quickly mention the votes. When the House divided, it was 77 versus 91. So even if all the three Indian Christians and the Anglo-Indian would have voted, on the Pakistan side or on the India side, 77 versus 91, just the numbers don't add up, and it would not have made a difference. And S.P. Singha, as we all know, even if he can symbolically kind of cast his vote, but the speaker's vote doesn't really count, unless there is a tie. So there was a symbolic side for it, but not a very, very practical side on this sense. The last kind of bit that I really want to talk about Singha is, well, two things actually happen. One thing which happens is that once Pakistan is actually created, there's actually no record of Jinnah being in touch with Singha, very interestingly. And as soon as the Punjab Assembly meets, now the West Punjab Assembly in January 1948, they do not elect him, but they elect a Muslim to become the speaker of the Punjab Assembly. And he's actually left completely forlorn. And that is very interesting because, of course, now you don't even need this kind of a grand coalition. And he keeps asking and says, well, can I be deputy speaker? Can I be something, and nothing really happens. And what happens at that time, also very interestingly, because of S.P. Singha hoping that he will end up being the speaker of the Pakistan, the West Pakistan, the West Punjab Assembly, a lot of Christians had kind of not realized what the impact of partition would be. So in January and February 1947, about 10 to 15,000 Indian Christians who were tenants of Hindus and Sikhs in West Punjab are thrown out of their tenancy because Indian Muslims are now coming in, and of course they claim a right to these tenancies rather than these Punjabi Christians that actually remain there. So coming full circle, in that sense, the whole thing of unrelatedness, I would really want to argue, is really key here. And at some level, I would say that the unrelatedness did go to help the Christian side one way or the other. It's when S.P. Singha kind of picked a side that unrelatedness did not really help. In fact, they got him into less political representation and a greater loss in terms of political power, because now they'd allied themselves with someone who actually did not require their help. So even though S.P. Singha was extremely pragmatic, and I actually think probably that maybe led to his death, because he had hoped all these great things, and then when nothing like that happened, in fact it backfired in a very bad manner. That's when he probably just fell sick and died, because he wasn't an old man. And that's when the whole kind of Indian the Punjabi Christian politics ends. And the shock, I would say, the immediate legacy of S.P. Singha was that after that, Indian Christian politics in the Punjab kind of dies for decades and doesn't really emerge. And the only Christian, so to speak, who ends up doing anything political, and that is the irony of ironies to a very interesting extent, is this guy called Mr. Cecil Gibbon, who is an Anglo-Indian, who's representing 5,000 Anglo-Indians. And these are 1948 figures. So by the 50s, that has gone to like 2,000 or 3,000. And that's when, so to an extent, I would argue that, S.P. Singha's politics kind of led to the death of Indian Christian politics in Pakistan, but then eventually led to a whole narrative being created around him that elevated him to such a status that no one actually looked into the details of his politics and how things ensued. But the bottom line that I really want to end with is saying is that I think the partition is still a very important thing, and I think a lot of what happened in the partition we are still trying to understand and trying to kind of grapple with, because it has effect not only on Hindu, Muslims, and Sikhs, but also on these Indian Christians, and a lot of their land rights, political participation, imagination as Pakistanis or as Indians really affected on this seminal moment. And I think, at least on the Pakistani side, I hope that once this article is actually published and all that, there would be a conversation to actually, one, base it on factual things, and two is have a good think on how this can be done in a more sort of reality-based and a more creative fashion, rather than kind of coming up with narratives that are simply untrue about a very nice man, but someone who didn't have that kind of politics that is being claimed on him. So thank you very much for listening to my long-winded sort of talk about this. Thank you.
Let's see. Stop it. Just hit record wherever it is.